a Canadian radio sanctuary podcast.
This is a comedy show, but throughout this interview, Graham does get into some serious subjects. He first off started talking about his homosexuality.
I suppose I wasn't really admitting things to myself until I was, 25, as it says in the book. I was, as far as I knew, heterosexual to that point, and wouldn't admit to anything else. But then suddenly I did and felt freer. But I don't like this sort of definitions to be categorized. You are this or that. I think people should be free to move from one to the other to do whatever they like, basically. They should be doing what they want to do. It's just that I'd never taken any active participation in homosexual interests up to that point, and suddenly felt, well, why not? And, I've only got one life, I should get around to doing what I want to do. And did. So that was... It took me time to get around to it, yes, certainly, didn't it? I mean, it doesn't take people that long today, but of course the atmosphere in England then was somewhat different to today. There wasn't such a thing as gay liberation. That happened a few years later. And, now it's a little easier, I think, for people to come out. They don't even need to. They can just be themselves, hopefully. But there are at least newspapers. There's a thing called Gay News, which I helped start in Britain, which has a pretty big circulation. I think the biggest circulation of any gay newspaper in Europe, anyway. Whose main aim really was to let people in the sticks, as it were, know that they weren't the only one. A little bit of communication, if you want. Because it can be very lonely in Huddersfield if you think you're the only person that's like that. And at least we've been able to take some of that feeling away. I mean, I don't think there's anything that it isn't possible to see a humorous angle on. Quite frankly, a lot of camping, screaming queens are funny creatures. Certainly can be, and they should be seen to be such. So we exaggerated a little bit and had an aviator dressed in a pink leather uniform called Ginger. Yeah. No, Algae that was, wasn't it? They were worried about ginger because of the rhyming slang. Ginger beer, yes. That's right, that was that bit. Yes, that caused some offence, though. In fact, I was taken to task for it when we arrived in New York to do a stage show at the city centre. A lot of the gay liberation people were angry about that. And I said, well, why are you worried? I mean, I'm not. It hasn't worried me. Why should it worry you? And it shouldn't.
Graham talks about his degree in medicine.
Once you're qualified, people are always coming up and saying, I've got such and such a problem. It just happens. People are ill around you constantly. The last stint was for the filming of Life of Brian. In a sort of hazy moment, inquired of the producer whether we had any medical personnel that were going to be with us, because we've been in North Africa for a couple of months, and obviously there might be one or two medical problems cropping up with a unit of 130 people there for that length of time. And they said there was going to be a nurse. So I said, well, that's okay, all right. Just in case, I took along a whole trunk load of medical gear anyway, which was fortunate because the nurse turned out to be a first-year anatomy student, a Tunisian one at that. And his method of taking splinters out would have made your blood curdle, sorry. So I was in the position of being the doctor, really, because the hospitals there weren't the greatest. They're generally held as the general population reckons them to be places that you go into and you don't come out unless it's dead. So they're not very cheery places, and we tried not to send any of our people into them. So I was really dealing with everything that came up, from a threatened abortion that we had out there to, one or two near misses, but everything. Nobody's died so far, anyway, as a result of anything that I've done. I'm touching wood some time ago now, so I think I'm in the clear. Because obviously most of them were fairly fit individuals, mostly between the ages of 25 and 50, so not too many problems. But one thing I didn't anticipate, of course, was there were quite a few kids there, whole families had been taken over, families of carpenters and so on. So I had some paediatrics to tend to, and that was something I didn't do very much of at medical school. I had to do a quick bit of thumbing through books there. But it was interesting and time-consuming, because I was on the set from 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 at night, kind of thing, and then I had a surgery after that. But fun. Apart from the lady who wasn't actually ill, who kept wanting me to look at her breasts. And I did, yes, and that was a less than rewarding experience, especially the hair on them. I use it in the singular. There was only one, but it's a bit of an off-footer, you know.
When the first Python movie came out, it was actually a compilation of the TV programs.
Yeah.
Was there any reservations about doing Holy Grail, which was one concept all the way through, as opposed to a series of segments joined together?
No, that's more the sort of thing that we'd been aiming at anyway. The compilation, and now for something completely different, was just that, because that was going to be our effort to be seen in the States. We didn't think we'd ever be on television in the United States. We hadn't heard of PBS at the time, and had no intention of allowing the commercial networks to take the shows and then massacre them, cut them up into bits and censor them. So that's why we made Now for Something Completely Different. And paradoxically, what happened was, in fact, the PBS shows of Python were seen first, really, and it became popular from TV. So that was a sort of slightly wasted effort, but at least the film made a bit of money, which gave us some kind of credibility in terms of movies, which enabled us to make Holy Grail. That gave us more credibility, which enabled us to make Brian. Although no real credibility with the major units like the big production companies of Hollywood, because they're worried by what we might do or say, and they still are, I think. So they didn't really want to touch Brian when we went to them with it. The best we could manage was to raise about half of the budget from Orion Warner, and the others just didn't want to touch it at all. So it was fortunate that George Harrison came through and found the money for us.
Do you grow rather impatient with the lack of progression on the part of the distributors? I mean, imagine it's 1981 and they still have this old-fashioned outlook on film.
Yes, they do. They're ignorant people, really. They're in terms of film, which is monstrous. In the final analysis, the people that really decide whether a film is going to be made or not are accountants. The people with the money, which is an appalling state to be in. So I look forward to a lot more independent production happening everywhere, and the destruction of the old order, really. That's happening in Britain. The film industry has virtually disappeared as it was. There's really only one major company now, EMI, and fighting a difficult battle, really. But there are independent productions coming along, and wherever they raise the money from, it doesn't matter, provided there's some films made in Britain again. And encouraging things seem to be happening in Australia, even New Zealand. And I don't know whether Hollywood will ever really come to its senses, though, because they're tied to a ridiculous tradition. And the way that they can just try to make a thing better by spending money on it is a silly way to go about things, I think. Like they can spend $40 million on a comedy that wasn't worth making in the first place if they'd read the script. It's ludicrous.
This is John Oliver, our special guest tonight from Monty Python, Graham Chapman. And Graham was asked, did his medical background help him diagnose his own alcoholism?
Well, yes, it didn't allow me to admit it to others and to seek out help. I was determined that I would be the person to treat me. And subsequently I was, in fact, because I noticed that there were certain little signs that my liver might be about to be affected. And that was one cause for concern, and also that I had to admit that it was beginning to affect my work, and therefore I should stop. And that is what I did. That occurred the very first day of filming of Holy Grail, and I was out on a mountainside in Scotland at 7 in the morning, and I'd forgotten to take along a hip flask or anything like that, so I was without alcohol, and there was no one in the crew who had any. Being the first day, normally there'd be somebody, one of the electricians maybe would have had a bottle somewhere, but no, I asked everybody. So I went through DTs out there on the mountainside, and that was an appalling experience. Especially, we were filming at the time the Bridge of Death over the Gorge of Eternal Peril, and that's what it was like for me. Yeah, it really was.
What was the reaction of the other members?
Well, they didn't know. They thought that it was rather odd that someone that used to be a mountain climber and rock climber would apparently suddenly be afraid of heights, which they thought is why I was shivering. I didn't disabuse them of that at the time. Merely completed the film by keeping up my daily intake to a reasonably moderate level for me. After that, as soon as I had a couple of weeks free, I stopped drinking, which is, some 4 years ago now, nearly 4 years. Once I made that decision that I ought not to drink ever again, it was relatively easy. It was a question of finding the time to stop. When I could go through the business of withdrawal, I knew I'd have to go through that. I'd seen Keith Moon go through it, a great friend of mine, on a couple of occasions. And it was hell. He went through hell with it, with hallucinations and believing that he was losing weight all the time and had to go keep weighing himself just in case he wasn't there anymore. It got that bad in the middle of the night. So I knew I'd got to go through that as well at some point. But really, though, after that decision had been made, apart from 3 days of, which I guess included all the hangovers that I'd missed for the past 2 or 3 years, because I was drunk all the time, and that's what it was like, 3 days of the most appalling hangover. After that, it was a question of finding myself again, wondering, well, what am I going to be like without this prop that I'd used for so many years? Am I going to be able to do the things that I used to do, like writing, for instance? That's the way I made my living, like acting. And then it was absolutely delightful gradually to find out that each one of the things that I'd been worried about was easier sober, very much easier sober, and life begins to look very promising indeed. But it takes time, and one could easily slip and go back to drinking, I think. So I'd never be complacent about it. But it is I'm determined that that's what I'm going to do, because I don't now see it as being a particularly enjoyable experience anymore. I suppose I've been through that. I've done everything I could with it and seen enough of it, thank you. It's more pleasant to live life as it really is.
We're speaking with Graham Chapman of Monty Python's Flying Circus. More with Graham Chapman as he discusses the Monty Python solo projects, for example, John Cleese and Fawlty Towers.
I enjoy Fawlty Towers. I was a little worried to begin with, thinking of John going off and doing a situation comedy.
Because that's where you people had come from.
Mm-hmm.
That's where...
Yes, we'd already done that, really, yes. Most of us, anyway. Actually, John hadn't been involved that much. He wrote a few Doctors, yeah, that's right. And he wrote a series of 6 of those on his own, just to see whether he could do it, kind of thing. And I suppose this was another stage to do something that was he created originally on his own and was to star in. So it was just another hurdle for him, really. Actually, he came out of it extremely well. It's a very funny series. The only proviso there, I suppose, is that, well, it doesn't really have a lot of social comment, but so what, it's fun. Yeah. I don't think he intends to do any more of them, because he's done that now, yeah. So I think at the moment he's writing a series with his psychiatrist. Now that he wrote the last one with his ex-wife, that was partly to help her on her way and to, I don't know whether that was to cement the marriage or to keep it apart or what, but anyway, they split up and he's now remarried and now, strangely, is writing it with a new series with a psychiatrist. I don't know what that will be like. We'll see. Yes, I mean, anything that any of us do outside Python can only be good, a good thing to do. I mean, it's not necessarily good, but it's all experience for us, and that's useful. Because when we were together doing the TV shows, one of the problems about going on and doing any more was that we'd been practically living together for 5 years. So we didn't have enough separate individual experience to come together and write about anything else, because we were sharing the same experience all the time. So now, when we get back together, there's a lot to talk about each time, and that's a useful sort of source to draw upon for material.
Comedy troupes such as Monty Python working a live stage, there are so many sketches that you have to make some changes here and there. Did you enjoy doing that, like the Drury Lane concerts?
Yes, very much so. And that's another place where the difference between drinking and not drinking there was a little hurdle, because for the first time I was to do a live show last year without the benefit of alcohol. And that happened to be at the Hollywood Bowl in front of 8,000 people, so it was, an interesting way to make a comeback, not just the usual 300, 3,000 or so, but 8, and it was filmed at the same time. So, but it was so much easier. It really was.
You've been drunk on stage before?
Oh, always, yes.
Really?
Yeah, always, all the time. If it wouldn't catch me going on without a stiff one in the old days. So that was it was good to find out. That's one reason too for coming round and doing this tour, because I'd never done it before, is to frighten myself. The idea of standing up and talking for an hour and a half to a lot of people, I've never done that before. It slightly worried me, so I thought I ought to do it. So I am. And it's enjoyable.
Graham Chapman wrote a number of the scripts for the series Doctor in the House, and he was asked if he wrote others.
Yes. I wrote, I think, about 45 half-hour programs of situation comedy for Ronnie Corbett, of the two Ronnies, Ronnie Corbett and Ronnie Barker. That was a long time ago, before the British television companies had an eye to overseas markets, so I don't think they sold abroad very much. But they were very popular in Britain at the time, and got some very good critical reaction, and we did well even with the demographics. I mean, the audience was good. We were up there in the ratings, so that was quite pleasing. That was purely a situation comedy, yeah. And to write so many of them was an interesting period to go through. Having to come up with, really at one stage we were writing half an hour every 2 weeks, I think, which is. It was quite tough going.
He was also asked if the Python programs were written, so that they wouldn't appear to be dated as the years went by.
Well, we tried to avoid anything that was tied down, that was too parochial, really, that was too tied to a certain event in time as well. And on the whole, any personalities that we touched on were merely representative of a breed, rather than impersonations. We very rarely did impersonations of political characters, for instance, but we simply used names that we liked or thought needed mentioning. There's one little piece of film I'll be showing tonight featuring a police constable who calls himself Henry Thatcher. Now that was actually written in 1969, long before most people had heard of Mrs. Thatcher. But that was just a name, really, to most people at the time. And it comes out as a little bit of a shock to see it today. Yes, so we certainly tried to make them each show so that it would be still viewable in a few years' time, yeah.